Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top stories this hour. In her first public remarks since Charlie Kirk's killing, his widow vows his legacy will, quote, never die, and calls her grief a battle cry. Suspect Tyler Robinson, arrested after a 33-hour manhunt, faces charges including aggravated murder and obstruction of justice. Medical staff say airstrikes across Gaza City left more than 30 dead, including children, as Israel intensifies its offensive and urges evacuations. The military says Hamas uses high-rise buildings for surveillance, while hundreds of thousands remain in the city amid shortages and continued strikes. Madrid calls in Israel's acting ambassador after Netanyahu's office accuses Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez of making a genocidal threat. Spain's foreign minister categorically rejects the remarks, escalating a diplomatic tit-for-tat over Madrid's moves to pressure Israel on the Gaza war. Poland boosts defence as tensions with Russia grow, with more than 20,000 civilians signing up for training in 2025. The government has raised military spending to 4.7% of GDP, the highest in NATO, as the army expands to over 200,016 personnel. President Ramchandra Pordel calls fresh polls after deadly protests forced Prime Minister Oli to resign and pave the way for Nepal's first female leader. Former Chief Justice Shinshula Karki is appointed interim Prime Minister as Gen Z anti-graft demonstrations shake Nepal's political order. An ethnic armed group says a junta warplane hit 2 schools in Rakhine, Myanmar, killing teenagers as they slept and wounding 22 others. UNICEF condemns the strike as a brutal attack on children amid intensifying clashes between the army and the Arakan army. Islamist fighters ambush an army convoy in South Waziristan, Pakistan, triggering a firefight that leaves 12 soldiers and 13 fighters dead. The attack occurred in the remote Badar region near the Afghan border, a long-standing flashpoint for violence. In London, Tommy Robinson uses Charlie Kirk's killing to galvanise support ahead of Britain's biggest far-right rally in decades, featuring speakers from Europe and the United States. Steve Bannon is listed to appear alongside other far-right figures, while questions remain over whether Jordan Peterson will attend. Now we start this hour in Europe, where Russia says its forces have captured 3 more settlements in Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region this week, while striking military and energy infrastructure in Ukraine. At the same time, Moscow confirmed that a Ukrainian drone targeted the Smolensk nuclear power plant, although it was intercepted and operations remained unaffected. Meanwhile, Kyiv claimed responsibility for drone attacks on Russia's largest Baltic oil port at the Primovsk and several pumping stations, triggering a fire and disrupting shipments. The Kremlin says peace talks with Ukraine are, quote, on pause, accusing Europe of obstructing negotiations. US President Trump has again warned that he is running out of patience with Vladimir Putin. The stalemate comes as Russia and Belarus stage major joint drills, raising fresh alarms within NATO. Now we're joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at the Hudson Institute and he joins us live from Tokyo, Japan. Thank you very much, Dr. Nagao, for taking the time to talk to us. We hear news of Russia once again encroaching further, slowly but surely, into Ukrainian territory, this time into the eastern territory of Dnipropetrovsk, which has been a flashpoint of the war. On the diplomatic side, Russia has said that peace negotiations are, quote, on pause with Ukraine, citing European powers obstructing the process. What are your thoughts on that?
view from the current Russia's move, Russia is intensifying their military attack against many countries at the same time. In case of the Ukraine, of course, this is the main area, but to expand territory in Ukraine as a side military operation, the 90 drone is entering Poland, or conducting joint exercises with Belarus. This military operation is raising tension against the country around Belarus or Russia, which is Baltic states and Poland, these countries. So why this is related with the military operation in Ukraine? Because if the rising tensions rise in the Belarus or the border with the Baltic state or border with Poland, in this case, NATO side need to deploy their forces in this region. At the same time, this same asset cannot deploy the backside of the Ukraine to support Ukraine. So NATO is not a military force directly involved in the war, but sharing the information or supporting the Ukraine military operation by supplying the other material. This military force is as a support role. These military forces is very important. But if the NATO itself need to deploy the forces more than northern area, the Baltic state and Poland, this area. In this case, of course, the supply is also going to this area and cannot go to the Ukraine, could happen. So Russia want to expand the territory, the east side of Ukraine is related with the military operation in the Belarus or the border with Poland. And one more thing that I need to say, what is the relation with the diplomatic move between the US and Russia? In this view from Russia, there is a possibility that such kind of scenarios they are thinking is, firstly, if the ceasefire fails, intensify military operation, expand territory is beneficial for Russia. But even if the ceasefire negotiation has really happened, still the expanding territory is good card to negotiate. So that's why anyway they need to expand the military operation to expand territories.
Dr. Nagel, we're 2 days away from marking a month since that Trump and Putin summit in Alaska. Vladimir Putin has said peace negotiations are on pause for the time being. However, were they ever moving since then?
My view from that negotiation in Alaska, of course, that was one kind of the achievement because Russia considered little to accept to secure Ukraine's security by accepting the military force from the Western countries. So that's why if the Putin really accepts the Western military force to secure the security of the Ukraine, this was a very big achievement. But at the same time, the view from the current situation, still this is doubtful. Is it really for Russia to accept the Western military force to secure the border in Ukraine? That is a little bit controversial situation.
Yes.
It will rely on the result of the next negotiation.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Nagel, for joining us here on the programme. Pleasure to have you on. We now move over to Europe for our next story, where British far-right leader Tommy Robinson has organised a protest in London named Unite the Kingdom. The protest aims to rally supporters around a platform combining anti-immigration views with concerns over free speech. The demonstration invoked the killing of American conservative activist Charlie Kirk, using his death to galvanise support for the rally. In a video posted online, Tommy Robinson called on his supporters to march for freedom for their children and for Charlie Kirk. A similar protest took place in July of 2024, where thousands of people turned out. During the upcoming protest, there will be a march across Westminster Bridge and a rally near Downing Street. Far-right figures from across Europe and North America are also expected to participate. Planned speakers include French politician Eric Zemmour and Peter Bastrion of the Alternative for Germany party, otherwise known as the AfD. Far-right commentator Katie Hopkins and controversial Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson are also expected to attend. We're now joined by Dan Perry. He is a world affairs analyst and he joins us live from Tel Aviv in Israel. Dan, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us on this today. Dan, Tommy Robinson has cited the death of Charlie Kirk as one of the reasons for this march. What does this say about transatlantic far-right linkages and worldwide far-right linkages, in fact? Dan, I believe you have a mute audio on.
Yes, apologies.
Thank you.
We are seeing the emergence of a new type of transatlantic alliance, far different from the old one. And we're talking here about far-right populist groups that are fundamentally anti-immigrant and whose main axe to grind, essentially, is opposition to the far-left progressive movement. The obsession with gender, the emphasis on identity politics, and a lot of the grievance that the far-right groups are feeling really has to do with the sense that Christianity, white culture as attached to this idea of a Western culture is under threat from various groups. And in the US, it may be more to do with Hispanics. And in Europe, obviously, it's Muslim and African immigrants. None of it is particularly pretty, but these groups have a lot of appeal because of what many people in the center, even the liberal center in both countries, think has been excessive, overreach by the progressive movement, and a sense that people in the West are no longer in touch with their own historical origins and are sort of the only society on earth expected to accept immigrants without limits. These are great exaggerations of the reality, but they do attach to certain problems that have emerged in some of these societies to do with immigration that many people believe is unchecked or has been too much allowed to exist in illegality, but also a real serious societal rift over what it means to be a democracy. And these far-right groups, I sense, are subscribing to the idea, the subversive but also seductive idea that democracy is essentially tyranny with majority, and once the government is elected, they should be able to do more or less what they want. That is what is driving a lot of the actions of the Trump administration in the U.S. We see manifestations of it elsewhere. Obviously, Erdogan's Turkey and Orban's Hungary. It was the case in Russia that was kind of a vanguard of all this 10, 20 years ago, but of course in Russia it mutated to full dictatorship, and the fears of people in the center in these Western countries are that if this far-right populist movement represented in the UK by Tommy Robinson, but also by others, some would say that Nigel Farage, who's currently leading the polls as part of it as well, that if they should come to power, the result would be tremendous diminution and maybe ultimately destruction of the liberal democracy, which means checks and balances and separation of the different parts of government, judicial, legislative, and executive, and all the other rights and safeguards that constitute democracy. That type of democracy that has brought prosperity to the West might disappear from the earth. This is a toxic divide and a real issue in Western countries. And the Charlie Kirk murder is being used to whip up support for the far right in a manner that I do not think Kirk himself, who was a man of dialogue and of the dialectic, would necessarily want.
Dan, I do apologise for interrupting you. We are currently showing live visuals of the streets of London where thousands and thousands of people are lined up in protest. As you can see there, a sea of Union Jacks and St George's crosses lining the streets of the English capital there. Dan, I want to come back to you as we look at those visuals about how many people are really getting behind this movement. Who exactly is Tommy Robinson, and what does it say about the state of Britain, the state of Europe right now, and what extent do these protests in London reflect a a broad wave of far-right populism in Europe and, of course, also in North America as well?
Well, I mean, Robinson is in fact a pseudonym. His real name has been almost forgotten. Yancey, I think it is. He is. I mean, his reputation is that of a rabble rouser. But he speaks for a very loud minority in Britain that basically hates immigrants. The immigration issue in the UK and also parts of mainland Europe can be viewed a number of different ways, and these far-right movements, I think, exaggerate the demographic impact of the Muslim immigrants. In the UK, I don't think it's more than 6%. Even in France, the immigrants, if you include the Africans as well, difficult to gauge because France doesn't keep demographic data as much as other countries, but it's no more than 10, 12%. Germany, also less than 10%. So it's not like the Muslims are going to take over Europe anytime soon. But what you do see is many cities where to which the immigrant communities gravitate. And, you know, there has been reporting about, for example, how in public primary and secondary schools in Vienna, immigrants, generally Muslim immigrants, account for over 40% of students. Of course, there are some cities in the UK that now have Muslim mayors. That includes London. There are cities where huge neighborhoods are considered to be off limits to police because of gangs of immigrants running them and criminality and so forth. But I think these communities tend to be congregated, almost ghettoized, in certain specific areas where their numbers are inflated, and so that enables, through selective reporting, the agitation of people who fear a societal takeover. The overall numbers don't justify that fear, but the situation in certain cities, for example, the banlieue of Paris, do seem dire to people who want to preserve the original culture. All this attaches to a huge philosophical question about the nature of migration and immigration, the question of indigeneity, who has the right to control the culture of a particular place, should borders be open, when you accept immigrants, should you try to assimilate them into your own culture? On the other hand, if you're a liberal culture, can you not do that? Can you be liberal with incoming immigrant societies that are illiberal and that, for example, harbor views that you'd consider to be misogynistic in some cases, certainly anti-LGBTQ, anti-gay, and more. So there's real tensions. And the far right in Britain, represented by Tommy Robinson, and certain groups in the U.S.,
yes,
for sure, are fanning the flames of this. Kirk himself, as I said, was remarkably a man of, he had extreme views for sure, but he wasn't as extreme, for example, as the far more extreme group surrounding a person named Nick Fuentes, who hated Kirk for not hating the gays enough. From their perspective, it's hugely complex, this constellation of groups in the far right, and they're all coalescing in the UK around Tommy Robinson's protest today. The numbers look big, but I think they still remain a minority in society at large. But the concern over immigration and national identity being diluted by too many migrants, that's not a tiny minority. It also may not be unjustified. There is a legitimate question whether a country should have its borders be open and should preserve its original culture. Of course, all humanity comes from Africa, so everything is a history of migration and conquest, and there really are no original cultures, but that's for another time.
Yes, Dan, do stay with us. We will, of course, bring you all the updates coming out of that rally in London when we get them. However, next we move over to West Asia, where a barrage of airstrikes have killed at least 32 people across Gaza City as Israel ramps up its offensive and urges Palestinians to evacuate. This has come from medical staff and the Associated Press agency. Palestinians in Gaza City have surveyed the damage after overnight Israeli strikes destroyed evacuated residential buildings. Many displaced families found their makeshift tents damaged, with nowhere left to go and unable to afford the journey south. Israel has intensified its offensive on Gaza City in recent weeks, aiming to secure the release of hostages held by Hamas. The Israeli military has ordered all civilians to relocate to the southern area of Al-Mawasi, designated a, quote, humanitarian zone. Let's listen in to what a few displaced Palestinians had to say.
امبارح في الليل قالوا لنا اخلوا بدهم يضربوا المنطقة هذه، ايش بيضربوا بالضبط مش عارفين. والله بعدنا تقريبا كيلو على المكان. زي ما انت شايف رجعنا لقى انا واخواتي وابوي وخواتي تقريبا 15 خيمة. هيك انت شايف هنا في خيمة، فيش رماد، كلهم مجزعات مسطحات.
ما عارف انه نلاقيها مواصلات.
يعني انا بعد اطلع على الجنوب الحين، انا بطلت اطلع على الجنوب، معيش لا خيمة ولا معي مصاري ولا.
هذا هو اللي بيعمله تطفيش، اما هو مش نقطته انه يستهدف حماس او اي حدا من بده اياه يعني. هو هدفه يطفشنا منها. يعني هذا ليش احنا معناش نطلع منها. من وين نطلع؟ بده 30 مليون تاع السياره لما وصلنا على الدير على الجنوب. كيف انا بدي اطلع؟ يدفع لي ما يدفعوا لنا مصاري نطلع منها. جيبوا لنا خيم بدل الخربت هذا ونطحين الاكل هذا اللي احنا قاعدين من دمنا بنجيبه.
We are once again joined by Dan Perry, who is a world affairs analyst, and he joins us live from Tel Aviv. Dan, this offensive, of course, is framed around destroying Hamas. However, it is, of course, also framed around freeing hostages. With 32 people killed and the sites of the collapsed rubble, huge residential areas being leveled. How can you analyse this as putting the hostages' safety first and also, of course, reaching Israel's other war objectives as well?
I don't think it can be analyzed as putting the hostages' safety first. It clearly doesn't. It looks like the government of Israel is willing indeed to even sacrifice the hostages in favor of its other goal, which is not giving up the fight until Hamas is gone. Israel currently, I think, is not really negotiating with Hamas. They're not prepared to negotiate really anymore. They want to dictate terms of surrender. And while that may sound extreme, in fact, those terms of surrender were backed just yesterday by the entire world in a vote of 142, I think, to 10 in the UN Security Council, because what the world wants is a process that leads to a two-state solution in the Holy Land, Israel and Palestine. And it wants the PA, the Palestinian Authority, autonomy government currently based in West Bank, to be restored to Gaza from where Hamas kicked them out in 2007. And you want Hamas, which cannot be justified under any existing agreement or mode of governance in the world. A militia that undercuts the sovereignty of what is supposed to be the government, the PA, similar to what Hezbollah does in Lebanon and the Houthis have successfully done by taking over half the country in Yemen and so on. They want Hamas gone and disarmed, not just giving over the keys to power, but disarmed. And the leadership, if not arrested, at least exiled. Now, this is a mixed bag because Israel foolishly does not want the PA to return. They won't say what they do want. So right away, Israel is undercutting itself by not presenting a day after plan or even a day after wish list. Israel, yes. Currently, the current government is, again, too short-sighted to want a two-state solution, which constitutes Israel's own demographic salvation, because without hiving off Palestine, Israel's population will be half Palestinian. So it would either not be Jewish or not be democratic. So Israel's government is very problematic, but in their desire to take out Hamas, they align with a global consensus. Remember that the Arab League, including Hamas's erstwhile patron Qatar, all called on Hamas to disarm and give up the hostages and give up the war in the so-called New York Declaration of July. And yesterday's UN vote, which has been somewhat misreported as recognizing Palestine, actually simply called for the July Declaration to be implemented, which is a two-state solution process, the PA restored to Gaza, and Hamas disarmed and removed. So what you see in Gaza right now is Israel's desperate efforts to somehow compel it by force. And I do not know if they can be compelled by force, because these are savage jihadist fanatics who are clearly willing to sacrifice Gazans. That's obvious, and probably want Israel to occupy all of Gaza City, be saddled with 2 million and some Palestinians that they have to house and provide welfare for and are responsible for, who are hostile, and deal with an insurgency for the next many years.
Dan, just briefly, because we're running out of time. There's a huge issue here, of course, and that is displacement. Gaza City has hundreds of thousands of residents. And the Israeli military says it drops leaflets every single time that there is a huge offensive like the ones that we are seeing right now. Israel has told these civilians to move to Al-Mawasi, calling it a humanitarian zone, but agency says it's overcrowded and under-resourced. How do you view this plan, especially since there has been Israeli airstrikes on that area in the past?
Well, it clearly can't be viewed as a particularly good situation for the Gazans. They either stay and risk death in Gaza City or go south to these overcrowded areas, maybe mainly tent cities, where the circumstances are dire and their health and nutrition deficiencies of every kind. It's terrible for the Gazan people. On the other hand, to advise Israel what to do is difficult. You know, it's easy to criticize Israel, but one thing that unites most of the critics is they don't have a much better idea what to do if they were in charge of the government in Israel. I mean, certainly I would do many things different. As you can see, I would certainly accept a two-state solution and absolutely restore the PA to Gaza. But the question of how to get Hamas to give up is which must happen, is not simple.
Yes.
And that's a dilemma they face. And an alternative would be to end the war and then condition reconstruction of Gaza on Hamas leaving and let the local politics, take its course. And presumably, if Hamas continues to rule Gaza post-war, to rule over the ruins of Gaza and to stand in the way of a massive reconstruction, I have to think that the population would find a way to rip them limb from limb. But
Yes.
that is the ugly situation we face in the Middle East.
Dan Perry, thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to have you on the programme. We now move on over once again, and a Chinese envoy has called for calm and restraint at a United Nations Security Council emergency meeting on the drone breach into Poland. The Polish armed forces had earlier reported that 19 Russian drones entered its airspace, many of which were shot down by Polish and Dutch fighter jets. At the United Nations Security Council meeting discussing the matter, a Chinese envoy has urged all countries to solve international disputes by peaceful means. Let's listen in.
我们注意到波兰、俄罗斯、白俄罗斯等有关各方近日围绕无人机事件的表态和反应，呼吁各方保持冷静克制，通过对话协商妥善解决争端，避免发生误解误判，防止事态扩大升级。在当前的形势下，任何误解误判都将加剧信任赤字，任何对抗言论都可能刺激局势升级，任何军事摩擦都可能引发更大范围的动。
Poland, along with the European Union and NATO, had accused Russia of launching the drones, but Russia has rejected the accusation. The Chinese envoy has also said that China's position on the Ukraine issue is objective, fair and consistent, focusing on promoting peace talks and a political solution. A Turkish prosecutor has ordered the detention of 48 suspects, including the mayor of Istanbul's opposition-run Bayrampaşa district, as part of a corruption investigation. Police carried out early morning raids at 72 locations to seize documents and detain suspects on charges including embezzlement, bribery and tender rigging. In a post on X, Bayrampaşa Mayor Hasan Mutlu from the main opposition Republican People's Party said he had nothing to hide and called the investigation a political operation based on unfounded slander. These raids have sparked protests across cities. A court ruling due Monday could remove the CHP leader in a case that is widely seen as a challenge to the democratic setup of the institution. Well, that is all that we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.
IT